So when we're looking at plants, we look for symptoms when we're trying to troubleshoot. Now this one, minus the Christmas decorations, one of the things I look at, I see these leaves are pretty droopy. They look wilted. It's kind of obvious, but I mean, that's something I look for when plants are unhealthy is that type of a look. It's not dead, but it's struggling. I stick my finger down here in this soil and it's pretty dry, down to 2 or 3 inches. And so that's a little too dry for this indoor plant. Okay, in addition to some of the water problems, there's some other things we can see in here too. This leaf right here, it's at the top. It should not be sickly like that. This leaf is lighter colored, but it's actually healthy. It's supposed to be a little lighter colored. This particular species does that when they emerge. But this leaf, something's wrong. I don't know exactly what's wrong, and sometimes that's the answer. We don't know the answer. If we start digging in deeper here, here's one that's pretty unhealthy. You can see that. It's a lower leaf. I mean, it's actually the oldest leaf that's on this stalk. That's kind of normal. I mean, that might just be natural age. Here's another. This stem right here has only 1 leaf. This guy is on its way out. It's probably going to die. If I was caring for this plant, I would probably just cut it out and try to save the rest of this plant that's mostly healthy. It needs a little water. All sorts of lessons on this group of plants. If we look at this guy right here, this is interesting. It's a common phenomenon I see, especially in interior plants, where this is potassium deficiency. I could verify that by doing a soil test as well as a test on this tissue, but I can just visually, from experience, know that this is probably potassium deficiency. Potassium deficiency shows up as some chlorosis, which means it's lacking chlorophyll. It's this yellow color around the margins of the leaves. That's classic potassium deficiency. And quite frankly, indoor potting mixes are notoriously bad for supplying potassium. In almost every building that I go into, I can find potassium deficiency. More potassium deficiency. You can see this leaf, for example, it's kind of on the margins of the leaves. It's not doing well. In fact, it's progressed so badly that we've actually got necrosis, which means the tissue has died. Here's some more there, and some more here. Oh, this one's very bad. As I walk around looking at interior plants, I often see potassium deficiency. There's more of it here in these same types of plants. You can see that sometimes it's spotted like that, but it's on the edges of those leaves. Look at these trees. Potassium could be part of what's going on here. In my experience, it isn't. As I'm doing an assessment of plants, I want to look at everything and not just get focused on nutrients or water. But this guy, for example, has got small leaves, very few leaves. It's very unhealthy. As I think about all the things that the plant needs, one of the things I realize is that we're near the entrance to this building. It's winter. Cold air is coming in. This is a tropical plant. It's indoors for a reason. It's not going to survive winter outside. But it's probably suffering from where it's located in the building, a little bit too cold during the winter months. Now, I see it in the summer as well, and it tends to perk up a little bit. It hasn't actually died yet, but it's a little bit weak.
A lot of the nutrient deficiencies, the common ones, are easy to see visually. Nitrogen, potassium, iron, sulfur, they're very visual. Phosphorus is more difficult. A lot of plants just show a darkening, like a darker green. Some plants show a purpling, but we don't see it most of the time. However, here's a good example of it. This centipede grass has got both chlorosis as well as some purpling. It really needs some fertilizer, probably a little bit of phosphorus, as well as maybe some nitrogen and potassium, maybe sulfur. I'm not sure 100%. Grass is a little bit tougher to tell because it's difficult to see older leaves versus newer leaves, interveinal versus whole leaf chlorosis, but definitely nutrient deficient, and phosphorus is one of the most likely candidates there. These are hydroponically grown strawberries, grown in the absence of soil, but the plants still need everything that other plants need. They need water and light and all that stuff, so all that stuff is being supplied, in this case without soil, artificially, with just growing in water. The water circulates through these pipes and brings nutrients to these strawberries. And you can see here, there's a whole host of examples of problems here. I've got some leaves that look decently healthy. These guys right here aren't too bad, but we've got some leaves that are sort of normal size and nice and green. But I've got a lot of leaves that have discolorations because of nutrient deficiencies. If you look down here, we've talked about potassium deficiency before. That is just classic. The margins of those leaves are chlorotic. That is potassium deficiency, certainly. This right here, this is intraveinal chlorosis. It's definitely iron deficient. Now, there might be something else going on. This plant is stunted. It is unhealthy. It might just be that this is just a sickly plant that just didn't have a chance from the beginning. We also see evidence of disease in here. We see evidence of insects. There's all sorts of things that we would potentially be concerned about with these plants. If you look at these leaves right here, see the spots on the back. Again, that might be just opportunistic disease coming in because it's also looks like it's potassium deficient as well. Water is usually the biggest thing, especially outdoors, but all plants need water. A lot of these plants in this greenhouse have plenty of water. Some of them are even too wet. This guy, though, sitting in the back, somehow didn't get watered. Hasn't been watered for a while. How do I know? Well, he looks a little wilty. He doesn't look very healthy overall. It's kind of spindly looking. If you stick your finger down in the soil, it is dried. It's so dry I can hardly even get my finger in there. And I don't feel any moisture even all the way down. It's just bone dry down there. So obviously too dry. We've got some examples of nutrient deficiencies in here as well as diseases and evidence of insect damage. Some of these plants are pretty sickly. This guy looks like he's about ready to be done for. This guy does too. This is sick. I mean, most of these plants are a bit sick. Sometimes disease moves in, it's opportunistic, right? It's kind of like having cancer and then getting another disease because your body's weak. So that can happen. So it's a little difficult sometimes to know what came first, the disease or the other problem. I'm seeing some evidence of some disease and some insect damage. You can see here, these leaves have got this white powder on them and some deformities in the leaves, as well as they're not having the right kinds of colors that they're supposed to have. If you look at this little card here, it's a sticky card, and you can see there's the dead remains of quite a few insects. Oftentimes insects create wounds that diseases can find their ways into, and often that's what ends up killing the plant. It's not necessarily the insect itself, just because they pierce the tissue and create an opening. Sometimes the insects are actually eating the leaves. Whether we're inside in this greenhouse, for example, or we're outside, plants have the same needs. And I need to look at them in a troubleshooting scenario and ask myself, well, which one of those needs or multiple needs is not being met? There's lots of clues, visual clues that I can go for. For example, one of the things that we see, like on this guy, we see these tips that are burnt. Now, normally, I would think that is a salt damage because the salts travel to the end of the leaves, the water evaporates, and the salts get deposited and can burn the leaves. This particular plant, this Chinese fan palm, is actually supposed to do that. However, if you look back here, this leaf is not healthy. Not only has it got those tip burns, but the tip burn is worse than normal, which tells me something's wrong. And it's also chlorotic. It's lighter green than it's supposed to be. In fact, it's even almost whitish and yellowish. Chlorosis, again, means lack of chlorophyll, and that's why plants are green, because chlorophyll makes them reflect green colors, and that's typically what we want to see on most plants. When we start looking around at other plants, like if you look over here, you might look and say, whoa, what's wrong with this plant? That plant's supposed to look like that. It's variegated. That's its normal colors. Similar thing with this guy right here. Now, I see some weird curling of the leaves in here. I don't know what's going on with that. Sometimes I don't know the answer. But that's if that got worse, we might be asking the question, is that an insect? I do see some fungus gnats, like that guy right there. That's not good in a greenhouse. We want to get rid of those guys. This plant, not looking so healthy. These older leaves that are bigger are too light colored. That is chlorosis. The newer leaves are green and look a little more healthy. Mobile nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, tend to show up on older leaves first, like these. So it's probably a nitrogen deficiency. For example, we know that many times phosphorus deficiency results in purpling of plants. But this plant, this guy right here, this guy right here, these are supposed to be purple. These are not phosphorus deficient plants. I see some variegation. The plant's supposed to be like this. This guy, this Chinese evergreen, is a little bit too light yellow. I mean, it's normally lighter green anyway, but this is almost white. And having experience with this plant, I know that it's a little too white. And it's over the whole plant. It's probably nitrogen deficient. Plants that we might have problems on, there's some tip burn. Again, that's probably fairly normal for this type of plant. Here, we see interveinal chlorosis on the newer leaves, which probably means iron deficiency. These are not supposed to look like that. That's a healthier leaf that's older and it's pretty good. These old leaves, though, they're not doing well. Again, that might be nitrogen or maybe sulfur, nitrogen or potassium, but probably nitrogen deficiency. Come over here, we see a little more iron chlorosis. I mean, this leaf right here, that's what this leaf should look like, is that guy right there. Nice and big, green all over. And you contrast it with this guy right here. These leaves are smaller in comparison. They got interveinal chlorosis. Again, probably an iron deficiency. Sometimes older plants just start to die, just like people do. I do see signs, again, of potassium deficiency on the margins of these leaves, like we've talked about previously. Here's one that's really showing the symptom. It's greener right in the middle and on the edges, the margins of the leaves. It's beginning to be chlorotic. Now, sometimes that's normal. Like I have said, like this new leaf, lighter. New leaves on a lot of plants are supposed to be lighter colored, and in contrast to this more mature leaf. This one, we'll watch it over time, and it should green up and get bigger and look more like this after it's had a time to mature.
When I'm troubleshooting, I look for patterns. For example, you can see in this picture of the sports field that there's problems with the irrigation. There's not enough pressure, so you're getting green spots right where the heads are, as well as out at the edges where the end of the sprinkler water is being applied. But in between, it's getting dry because there's not enough pressure. Again, that's a great pattern to look for. This other one shows on this baseball field that, again, it's a little more random, but you can still see where the sprinkler heads are. It's more green, those little green dots. There's also some other things going on in this field, but mostly it's related to water. You can also see some patterns related to fertilizer or salts or even heat. You look at these sidewalks, for example. Sidewalks get hot, and sometimes if I don't get enough water or it's just exceptionally hot, the sidewalk can actually heat up and kill the grass that's right next to it. Or it could be related to salt damage. In the winter, we apply salts to our sidewalks and roads, and if we get too much and we don't wash it through in the spring, it can cause salt damage. You can also see salt damage here in this fertilizer patterns. This fertilizer wasn't applied correctly, and you can see these patterns that are related to how the fertilizer was spread. We can also see patterns with insects and disease. Some diseases have very distinctive patterns. Sometimes insects would just be more random, for example. So looking for patterns oftentimes is a helpful tool in diagnosing problems.
Know anything about geraniums? They're supposed to have nice, big green leaves. They have a little bit of a marginal color in there that's kind of cool looking, and then they put out a beautiful flower. These geraniums, now there is a little bit of a flower there and it is beautiful. These guys have managed to go ahead and do it despite the fact that they are so sick. These are so yellow. They're very deficient in nutrients, probably nitrogen. The chlorosis has even gotten so bad on this leaf that it's white and not just yellow, with some other ones here as well. There's plenty of water in these. In fact, I suspect that they're overwatered. They feel too wet to me, and that could cause secondarily the leaching of the nitrate out of these pots, which causes the nutrient deficiency because they're too wet. Too wet can also lead to disease.
I love this picture. It shows one of my students, Beth, working with me in a hydroponic growth chamber with grass. I often hear that grass grows short roots. And there's some truth to that. When we mow short, it does cause the roots to grow short. But frankly, the roots could be a lot longer and more robust if we just had better conditions for them. And this picture really illustrates that. You can see the depth of these roots. That's the genetic potential for this grass and these roots. The ones on the right have excess nitrogen. They're getting a lot of top growth. They look really green on top. It's looking good short term, but long term, those roots are much more shallow and there's less of them. The one on the left has got a more optimal level of nitrogen, and the roots are much deeper, more full, and you can see that we just do things better when we have the right mixture of nutrients, including nitrogen. So what do plants need to live and actually thrive? Like, how do we help them really be healthy and perform the way we want them to? So they need nutrients and water. There are certain elements that are required for them to have, and they've got to get them. Some of them come from the air and the water, the non-mineral ones. And the mineral ones mostly come from the soil, things like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. They have to have the proper environment. It has to be the right temperature, energy, root zone pH. We want an absence of toxins such as salts or xenobiotics, which are like pesticides or anything else that might be a toxic problem. And then pests. I mean, we get microbes, fungus, bacteria, insects, weeds. These things can all be a problem. So we need to really think about all these things. When I'm troubleshooting, I try to look at all of these things. One of the issues is that somebody sort of becomes an expert in one thing, like maybe they're an expert in pest management. Then everything's a pest problem, and they forget about these other aspects. So it's important to think about all of these. I literally keep this list with me when I'm troubleshooting, and I just walk down through it. When I got a plant that's unhealthy, I just start asking myself each one of these questions. Which one of these things needs to be corrected? And most of them I can measure and assess.